When it comes to church planting, there are often many unrealistic expectations that we have. And so whether you have planted a church and want to laugh along with us or are considering planting a church, in this episode, we want to talk about 4 specific unrealistic expectations that most church planters have.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Drosian. Joining me is Dylan Dotson, and today we're talking about 4 unrealistic expectations that church planters often have.
So if you've already planted, you can probably laugh and relate to these. And if you're thinking of planting, just want to let you know some of the things in my experience, and this is not just my experience, it's like seeing people and talking to people. I feel like a lot of people run into these things.
Yeah.
The unrealistic expectations that we have going into church planting to hopefully give you a little bit more of a realistic expectation. Or to laugh at your own misery like I have, and we have. That's stuff that we thought.
Oftentimes.
So here we go. Here's number one unrealistic expectation people have. And when we talk about church planting, I'm talking about people that are thinking of planting but haven't really started the process. So they haven't started raising funds or meeting or gathering a team. Like, I think I want to do this. I'm a seminary student or I'm interested in it. Maybe God's calling me, leading me to this direction. Here's number one. People are often, probably always, unrealistic in the number of how many people will come. And I don't just mean most people aren't like 500 people are going to come right. Like people... Yeah. But even like in the smaller numbers, they often think it's going to be more. They think 20 people are going to show up to the first meeting when it's going to be 10.
Yeah.
Or they think 10 people are going to show up when it's going to be 5. It's going to be, and not everyone's story is unique, but generally speaking, a lot less than you think. Like sometimes we have this idea that God's leading me to do something. And so then it's not that we think it's going to be easy, but we think it's going to work.
Yeah. Which
just because God's leading you to something, it doesn't mean it's going to work. Or maybe it will work, but it's going to be really hard. And so I've just noticed, it's probably the biggest thing, is that the amount of people we think are going to show up to our meeting or our initial Bible study or join the launch team, it's going to be slower and more frustrating than you think. Even if you're already expecting it to be frustrating, I think every church planter will tell you it's even more frustrating than they thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a little bit of a product of the world we live in, because I think no matter what church planter you talk to, everyone knows someone who has a story of like...
Right.
500 people actually did show up first day, or something ridiculous that you just always kind of have that in your mind, even though you probably know, if you actually think about it, that that's not going to happen or that's not realistic. But everyone just kind of has those like crazy stories in their head. Then it kind of, I don't know, the longer it goes, eats away at you, and you think that that's going to be.
And with that too, like you obviously with social media, you know churches that are bigger, and so you kind of assume, well, when this church does something, people just show up, and so they assume that that's going to be the same way when you do it. The problem is, it's kind of like when you graduate college and you want all the things your parents have, like you want the car and the big house, and you want to be able to go on the vacation. You want maybe not a big house, but a bigger place than maybe the 1-bedroom apartment you're living in.
Sure. And
we forget that your parents had 20 or 30 years to where they are now from when they graduated. Like they didn't get all the stuff that they have now right when they started. And when you're planting, like you don't have, people don't, even if they are friends with you, they don't have the trust with you built like they do with this other church, or the friendships or the memories. And so I would just say that less people will show up to the things that you do, especially in the initial launch phase and all that stuff, than you think. Even if you're, like in our case, our initial church planting interest meeting thing had like 37 or something adults, which is like more than I thought. And I was like, oh, well, that was the biggest thing we did. I think that was the biggest gathering of people we had, other than it's like some fun event, until we launched. Like we never had that many people, adults in the room again, for something that wasn't like a bunch of inflatables and stuff like that.
Right.
So less people will come than you think. And even if somebody comes one time through the course of your launch team meetings and all that sort of thing, just know it will be less.
Yeah. And this is where we kind of get into the danger that everyone says that they don't have, but everybody has, of equating numbers to church success.
Or faithfulness.
Or faithfulness.
Or if it's going to work.
Yeah. And so it's a hard one not to have. But
so generally speaking, even if you are trying to be realistic, just know there will probably be even less people that come to your stuff as you prepare to launch than you think. That's one thing that's unrealistic. Here's a second thing, that people will just serve, give, or join a group, or do whatever we ask them to do. Now, again, even if you are realistic in this, which I think people are more unrealistic in this than they are in the first one. I think the first one, they at least kind of know not everyone shows up.
Yeah.
That we just kind of assume that once they're there, once we tell them what to do, that they're just going to do it. As if people don't need to be led and encouraged and brought along and explained and kind of discipled why this is important. So we think, here's what we often do. We talk about here's how I'm going to do groups, and here's how I'm going to do serving, and here's how I'm going to do, we talk about how it's going to be organized and all these sorts of things, but we never talk about how we're actually going to get people into them.
Yeah.
Like we never talk about how we're going to, not never, but you know what I mean, how they're going to actually give, or how they're going to serve, or why they're going to, like what reason we're going to give them to join a group.
Yeah.
We just assume that everybody is called into ministry, which we know they're not, like we are, led into ministry, as if they don't have normal jobs where they have their mind is elsewhere, and then we get frustrated that people don't do what we ask them to do, because we thought that we had this great idea, but we never kind of thought and prayed through and strategized behind how we're going to get people to move in this direction.
Yeah, it's very easy to think that everyone is the exact same as you, whether you're a pastor or staff member or something like that. It's easy to think that, well, this is automatic for me to be in these positions, so it's going to be for everybody.
Yep.
And it doesn't give me a second thought, so everyone's just going to swing on in just like I did, and that's not real.
And what
life,
happens, it makes us more frustrating, in my experience, and this might be hard, maybe mean to say or hear, but it's true, is that sometimes this is true, but sometimes it's not true. We just assume that people aren't spiritually mature enough. That's why they're not doing what we're asking them to do. And it could be that they're actually more spiritually mature than you. It could be that you have not given them a compelling reason or explained to them why it is beneficial for them to be in a group, or why they should give more than they do. Maybe they are really generous, but you haven't given them a reason to believe in the vision of this church and to say, well, they should just support the gospel. Well, why would they support this church that you're planting when this other church that maybe they know or they got friends at has been making a big impact?
Yeah, very true.
And so again, we just assume people will serve, join a group, give, do what we want to do without actually leading them to do it. And then it becomes frustrating because, again, we were unrealistic. We talked about, again, how we were going to do groups and not how we were going to get people in them to begin with, right? Like, and we're going to do sermon-based, we're going to do this. Like, that's good to know, but you also got to move people.
Yeah,
and
give people a reason to join.
And it's harder, man. That it's like now that we're launched, we're almost 2 years in. Like it's easier to get people into groups and to serve. It's way easier than it was when we started because there's a relationship there, there's trust. We have other people who are already involved who love the church.
Yeah.
In the beginning, nobody knows what's going on, and so it's easy to kind of think people will just join when they won't.
Yeah.
So number 3, this might be the biggest one. And that is the need for organization. Now, here's the reality situation. All church and contexts are different. In the American church, we can be annoyed about it, or we could it just is what it is. It takes a lot of organization. Yeah. It's not like other parts of the world where there's house churches are the big thing, and you don't really need a ton of organizations. Like in the United States, churches are, even the average church might be 50, 75, 100. To even bigger than that. The bigger it is, the more organization it takes. Like you need systems and processes to get people involved and connected and all these things. And sometimes we think, again, God is leading me to do this, and he very well may be, but then we don't talk about, okay, how are we actually going to move people to groups or to serve or to, like, it just takes a lot of organization. It takes a lot of help, and it takes a lot of people.
Yeah.
To do a house church thing, which is perfectly legit, it doesn't take as much organization. But I see people get frustrated when things aren't growing, and they think it's a spiritual issue when it's just that they don't have the organization or the parts in place to facilitate growth and new people.
Yeah, and this is a big one where, like you said, yes, you maybe and probably are called to plant a church, but you're probably not called to do it alone.
Yep.
And so this is one where surrounding yourself with people who have strengths that you don't, because if this is a unrealistic expectation of yours that you won't need it or it won't be as important, that means it's probably not a big strength of yours, to be honest.
That's very true.
Organizations and systems and stuff like that. So surrounding yourself with people who that is a strength of is not a sign of weakness or anything like that. It's a sign of strength, really, that you're willing to recognize that and get people that are good at things that you're not.
And this is one of the things, again, it's frustrating about church planting is it's unrealistic because we think people are just going to get plugged in.
Right.
But it's like in the culture and context that we are, it takes organization. And so we have this vision and this idea of what we're going to do, what God's going to do in the city through this church and through these people. And then it kind of doesn't, it's not happening the way we want it to happen. And it's like, I love what Larry Osborne talks about, and I'm going to butcher it, but he talks about how, oftentimes we think a spiritual issue and it's really a practical issue. Like, let's just say, for example, why aren't we growing? And there could be a number of reasons. And it could be because you're out of parking space. Like now that might be easier to see. Like but that's like I remember one guy was talking about how they had like a 30% participation in their small groups. He's like, it was awful. So he's like, I did this small group series for a month. We talked about it, we prayed about it, and nothing was happening. He's like, I felt like a failure. Then he said, one of his mentors said, tell me your assimilation process for small groups. And I don't remember how his assimilation process was, but it was awful. Yeah. He said, all we did was change how we assimilated people into small groups, and now we have 80% participation. He said, we thought what was a spiritual issue was an organizational issue. Yeah. And so just know that sometimes that is the case, even when you're small. it's like there might be something that needs to be tweaked. It might not be a spiritual thing, and we underestimate the value and the need for organization. Oftentimes, especially because if you're a lead planter, more of a visionary type person, organization is not your strong suit. Mm-hmm. And so you just don't see the need for it, and that can cause issues down the road.
Yeah, and another thing is, especially if you are small, it's easy to think that this stuff isn't as important because there's only a handful of us or whatever number. It's easy to get people assimilated. However, as you grow, if you grow, that's just going to get so much more difficult to implement down the road. So even if you're small, even if you don't really see the need for it, start it early.
Yep. So number 3, the need for organization is often unrealistic because we don't think we really need it.
Right.
And then number 4, that people don't need training. We just kind of think if they love Jesus and if they come and I tell them to do X, they'll just do X.
Yeah.
And then they don't do it well, and then we get frustrated. Maybe we think they're not spiritually mature because they weren't trained. Or another example is maybe you have someone who is good at a certain skill, but they don't relate to people well, or they have issues well, and it's because the churches they've been in the past, like no one's actually mentored them and discipled them. Oftentimes there's a lot of reasons why people aren't doing what we want them to do that doesn't have to do with a spiritual issue.
Yeah.
Like you tell them to be a door greeter, let's say, like you're in a hospitality team, and they just stand at the door and they're on their phone and they're like, why? This should be self-evident. Like, why aren't they doing that? Well, no one ever told them why it's important to put the phone away, or no one ever told them why it's important for them to hold the door instead of putting a doorstop there. Like why it's important for them to stand outside and hold the door open instead of inside and wait till someone walks up and then open the door. Like no one's explained to them why it's important. No one's actually trained them. And then things don't go the way you wanted, but it's not their fault. It's actually our fault.
Yeah, I think we put so much thought into, as church leaders put so much thought into each position. If you just use something like if you have a production team, for an example, you put so much thought into that this all needs to go this way. And I spend so much time back there that then when you onboard someone or bring someone in to start training, it's easy to forget that they don't know any of that stuff. Not just that they know a portion, but they might not know anything. And so kind of dumbing things down to the dumbest level to be able to train someone from the ground up, I think is super important, because there's things that, I've seen a bunch of times throughout the years where someone's kind of messing up a position or not doing things that seem really obvious to do.
Right.
But then you think about it and you think, well, I've been thinking about this position for a year now.
Right.
And this is their first time here and I didn't tell them anything. So obviously they're not going to know what to do, but then we start to blame them instead of ourselves.
Yeah, totally. So here are the 4 reasons, 4 unrealistic things again, and then I want to kind of give you in on some advice that I didn't really realize when I started out.
Oh.
Again, 4 reasons, 4 unrealistic expectations church planners often have. How many people will come to things, that people will just serve, give, or join a group or do whatever you want them to do. That's number 2. Number 3, the need for organization. We don't understand how important that is, being organized. And number 4, we think that people don't need training. We don't understand how much training actually goes into it.
Right.
And here is, to me, what makes church planting hard. Obviously, all careers are hard. There's different things. One of the things that's hard about church planting is people say, oh, church planting is hard. And everyone tells you it's hard, but they don't really tell you like why it's hard. Or they might tell you because you're going to be hurt by people, or it's like something's not going to go. It's just like that. They don't give you an answer.
Yeah.
And maybe this is just anecdotal, my experience, but I think it's probably shared among many church planters, is what makes it so hard is that so many things that you hope, plan, and pray for simply don't go as planned.
Sure.
So people don't show up, even though you've been trying and meeting and playing and as much. People don't give, even though you've been showing them the reason why, or someone that you've known forever just decides not to. You're not, because of your lack of organization, it doesn't. You can't grow the way you want to grow, or you put someone in a spot, you didn't train them, and so it's like there's so many reasons why, but things just don't go as you plan. Like you're kind of naive, and you might understand you're somewhat naive, but maybe not as much as you realize you are till you're down the road. At least that was for me. Like I felt like I was pretty realistic going into it because we had been part of a church plant before Christine and I were led this church plant that we're at now. But it's different, when you're not actually the lead pastor. There's some things different there. But so many things just don't go as planned, and that's what makes it so hard. And so I just want you to know that is, for me, if I could tell you what makes it actually so hard, is that everything that you're hoping for, and sometimes it'll go greater, but so many things won't go as you planned, and that's what makes it really difficult.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's kind of the case with most things. Most worry and most things that are difficult is more coming from unrealistic expectations, or things not going as planned, or things not going the way that you thought they would go. I think what makes church planning maybe a little bit more difficult, or just a little more different, is the things that you're hoping will go as planned, or things that you're planning on is people's spiritual lives, right. Or at least
you're hoping for good things.
Yeah,
it's not that you're just hoping like when you open a business. Not that it's bad that you make a lot of money.
Yeah,
but you're hoping that like people meet Jesus. Like
and you're not just focusing on yourself.
Right,
too.
like
it's affecting
you're
other people.
upset. Like you're praying for things that are good and
Yeah.
they don't happen. And that's what makes it so hard.
Good
It's
point,
not
yeah.
just like some rant. It's like, this is actually matters. Like, why isn't this happening? So
Right.
that's what makes it hard. So, hey, those are 4 unrealistic expectations people have going into church planning. If you're going into church planning and have questions, or if you're just in ministry and have questions you want us to talk about in a future episode,
Sure.
practicalplanting.com/questions. You can submit it there. And until next time, we'll see you on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.